Hello and welcome to Rule of Carnage. This is a series of conversations between me, a human named Mike, and Glenn, a human named Glenn. We have both been designing miniature games for a while, and we love to talk about designing miniature games. Um, Last week on this podcast, we talked about whether or not you should go down the route of publishing and getting a publisher, or whether you should self-publish and publish things through your own machinations. Now, I gave some advice, or I recounted the story of me starting with publishing through Osprey and doing that for a while, and then deciding that perhaps I was going to try something else and give self-publishing a go. What's interesting is that Glenn has followed the exact opposite trajectory and is in fact just coming to the end of his first proper experience working with a serious publisher who has all kinds of staff and creative people around it. So Glenn, I would love to know, and we'll bend this in the direction of sort of advice to existing and new miniature game designers as well. But I would love to know why it was that you chose self-publishing in the first place as your first act as a game maker, and then how you warmed up to the idea and came to the conclusion that doing publishing was a good idea. And then I think I'm sneakily really curious about whether this is changing what you might do in the future, one way or the other.
So I think the main reason that I originally went through self-publishing things is that the first idea that sort of came together in my head wasn't particularly a miniatures game, wasn't a single book. It was going to be a thing that was card based, and it made more sense as a set of components. And by the time I for doing sort of board games and card games, I would kind of feel like by the time I figured out how everything wants to look, I need to figure out all the graphic design because I need to like understand how the information is being approached by players. I need to figure out all of the components and how the components can be handled. And essentially, I have to make the whole physical game at least once myself. And then it felt like, you know, then once I've gone through a large amount of time preparing that thing and making it, I have to go to a publisher and sort of spend X amount of time pitching it around.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt like, well, all I would have to do is figure out how to do production and logistics, you know, which are not things that I find overly difficult. Figure out a budget as to what I would need to sell, like doing it, taking my own percentage. And if that seems like an acceptable and achievable thing, why should I bother going through the rigmarole of like going round publishers and having meetings with people and networking and etc. And I think a large part of it for me is like it's about like a personal set of like skill bases, and also things you're willing to be interested in,
Mm.
and sort of time that's available. And I'm good at figuring out logistics and budgets and things like that. I am not good about appearing overly enthusiastic about a thing to somebody, you know, where I want them to look at the thing and see that it is good. I'm not good at
You don't
pitching
want to have
things.
to salesmanship them into convincing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to a degree.
So, I mean, I think what you've described there seems extremely pragmatic. It was like you could see a route from where you already were in the design process to what probably a finished product, maybe manufactured, maybe distributed. I suppose this goes back to the part of the conversation we were having last episode about like what were your goals at this point, because clearly if you had have shopped it round to a publisher and you've accidentally landed with a big board game publisher that already has an audience, then that clearly would have been, that clearly would have been the better route. You would have had more people buying your game. But what was it that you kind of walked into that realm with the expectation of, like, what was success going
I
to look
mean,
like?
yeah, when honestly, when I first sort of started doing my own thing and doing a game and trying to put it out there, a lot of it was like, I wonder what will happen. I wonder if this can be achieved. I wonder if I can do this. I
Right.
genuinely, like, I really don't know. This is not a job where you go and get like a degree in it, and it's not, there are mentoring programs, but there's not a lot of people who are sitting down and saying, okay, this is the realistic situation, this is how you do it, this is the standardized career path of a games designer,
Hmm.
in tabletop games. That just isn't a thing. And so, I got to a point of going around conventions and having conversations with people. I was thinking, I'm pretty sure I can do this. I've got a feeling I can do this. Let's see if I can do this. And I ran the numbers and I realized, it was like, as much money. I think at the time I was sort of wondering whether to get a new kitchen, and it was a 50-50 call on the new kitchen or doing all of the like upfront stuff for a new game. Um, I think also one of the things for myself, and this is part of why I have ended up going the publisher's route with Exalted Funeral specifically, is that I found that I found it hard to get my sort of teeth into the idea of what publishers want.
Mm.
I find it easier to write to a brief, or write to a sort of set of ideas. And when I first did SSO, which is the first game, this was a thing written to do well on Kickstarter, and
Mm.
that's a brief. That this has a solo mode. This is easy to fulfill because it's a thin box. It's a sci-fi horror game. These are all things designed to be good to pitch to Kickstarter. So in a way, self-publishing allowed me to have a brief to build a framework round, in a way that pitching to most publishers I was struggling with a bit more. I've spoken a few times about, like, sometimes I've gone to pitch to certain publishers, and I'm not knocking any given publishers. Their website feels like, beige war game, and it's like, I don't know who you are, so I don't know what to pitch to you. And then I've gone to people like, what are you looking for? Because I'll figure out what you're looking for. And like, well, tell us what you're passionate about. I'm passionate about all sorts of things. I don't think that you're passionate about anything, so I don't know how to talk to you. And like Exalted Funeral, I've pitched around various people, and they clicked on the Exalted Funeral website, and I was like, I'm pretty sure I know, what is going to, talk to these guys. And I suggested something, and we had a Zoom meeting, and like two or three movie references in, that it was sold, because they were just like, yeah, absolutely, we completely get it, we're all on the same page. And because
Right.
it's like, because I
We
knew
all
that
we all
they,
had VHS trauma collections.
yeah. Well, I think the single moment, I think, that got it sold in the first sort of 10 to 15 seconds of the thing, I was talking about the and I've said it, I think, once, twice on the channel, the scene in RoboCop where the guy comes out of the toxic waste and then gets hit by the car, which is like a sort of, that's the visual shorthand of a lot of what goes on in Puke Apocalypse. And they were like, right, okay, whatever else happens, that's sold. You've got any other ideas? Should we just chat? And etc. etc. And it was, for me, it was just because they had such a clear like vision and who they were, that I found it easier to pitch to them, because I
Right,
felt,
and so it took you a while to find someone with that kind of clarity. So before that point, you were able to build that clarity for yourself by saying, well, I'm going to publish these things myself, but I'm going to publish them for a specific reason, or into a specific market, or into a specific kind of sales channel.
yeah, that gave me, that sort of provided to me the framework around which I could build and design things, rather than just sort of
Mm.
floating around out there. Also, I think, like, frankly, I'm kind of impatient. with a certain number of things. It was like, okay, I'm designing a game, and now I've got to pitch it around. Well, pitching around is kind of like waiting for something to happen. So all I have to do to not have to wait for things to happen is learn about international logistics and EU CE marking and IOSS registration and all of that sort of stuff. Well, I'll just do that. That's better than waiting for somebody else to tell me what my situation is. I'll
No.
just do that. That seems like the easier thing than waiting for and relying on somebody else. And then, yeah, I mean, I've
Then you
always
accidentally realized that you were in fact far more qualified, therefore, than most small publishers.
well, there have been sort of points where, yeah, people have sort of I CE marking. I won't get into because I keep seeing people doing things that are borderline illegal in surprisingly large companies sometimes. Yeah, and it's like I've always been like, so I've pitched various times to Osprey, and I don't know if it's bad luck, I don't know if it's something else, but repeatedly I've pitched to Osprey, and I've gotten back. Like I pitched a sort of Hammer horror style game when, as it turns out, Silver Bayonet was like, in the works. And they're like, well, this could be interesting, but it doesn't matter because we can't do it if Silver Bayonet is coming out. And I had that experience 2 or 3 times with Osprey, and quite a few times I had that experience. I said, "Well, tell me what you do want. Tell
Where
me
is the
what
gap?
tell me what the gaps are. Let me know what it is. If you're like, okay, we don't have a this, a that, or the other. I'll go away, and in a few months, I'll come up with an interesting way, and that will formulate and it'll come through." But for whatever reason, publishers don't seem to want to do that. They want you to come to them with this. Well, infuse us, like pay, and it's like I'm terrible at that. I'm just really, really bad at it. I don't like doing it. It's not a skill set I have. It's not something I enjoy. And every time, sort of, that sort of demonstrative enthusiasm occurs around me, I find it very off-putting. And so,
So,
like,
having accidentally backed your way into one of these recently, where firstly, Exalted Funeral had a clear thing that you could speak to. Secondly, you clicked with the people there. Now you've been through the process of having somebody else handle large chunks of the game. Now, obviously, you haven't got to the part where they're doing the printing and the selling and all that kind of stuff. But at this juncture, are you able to sort of see whether this is something that you want to do more of, was an interesting experiment, makes sense for a certain kind of game, but you'll keep doing both? Like, where do you think it leads
well,
you?
I mean, what's sort of interesting for me at the moment is that the SSO that I was doing on Kickstarter is a game with like intentionally is a game with a set of like small expansions, like single deck card, like tiny little expansion things.
Extremely shippable.
They're very, very cheap to put out and produce and ship and all of those sorts of things. And all of those were designed when I went through the original sort of designing and playtesting and putting together of SSO, which was like a sort of a year-long sort of process, and banked away and put to one side. So SSO at this moment is a very sort of self-propelling thing for Kickstarter. So it requires relatively little from me, and then each of those little decks comes out and it resells the original base set, which I ordered extra copies of when I, printed it X many years ago, and resells it and refuels it and spins it back through. So essentially, each time I go to Kickstarter, for a fraction of the outlay, I'm getting like just as much income as like from the original Kickstarter. So that's a production thing that still requires the logistics and the packaging and the parceling and the going through fulfillment and all those sorts of things, that doesn't necessarily require a massive amount of creative like input. I've got the artwork for the next 2 years of doing SSO things. I've got the writing for them. And so I do want to and still will continue to self-publish stuff. Um, but I'm freed up now to like look at other ways of doing things. And my experience with Exalted Funeral has been, I mean, absolutely fantastic. They've been just, I've been excessively lucky with them. I think I've been very lucky a lot of times throughout this process, but they've been absolutely fantastic. They want to do more things with me. They've like gotten every single reference, every single image, and it's been brilliant because it's just been sort of saying a couple of words to somebody and they come back with exactly what I wanted. And I
Mhm.
don't know that that would always be the process of going for a publisher. And I am talking to another publisher. Um, but I think what I said before, like in the previous conversation, is that to get this thing working as an independent, ideally you want more than one iron in the fire.
Mhm.
Um, and for me, like going for a publisher alongside self-publishing is a way of being able to sort of use my time and use my energies more efficiently. So I will keep self-publishing because I remain impatient with publishing and pitching, and I have ideas that I know that nobody will publish as well. Is for me a very big thing.
Well,
I,
that's another interesting thing. It's like the sort of other side of not knowing what publishers want is knowing that there are things that don't really fit with any publisher.
yeah, and also it's odd the things that seem to be because like I say I've published I've pitched various things with Osprey and they've come back saying, oh, unfortunately you've got something in the works, and then other things I've pitched to them, they've just gone, no, I mean that's just not going to fly. Obviously I pitched the PG Woodhouse game and he was like, I wish I could, but that's never going to happen.
Mm.
But what was odd to me is I pitched a superhero game and they were just like, just no, we have no interest in doing a superhero game. It's like it's kind of basically a martial arts game. But anyway, but he was just like,
Right, yeah,
no,
martial arts pulp, like it's yeah.
yeah, he was just like, no, we have no interest in doing that. A non IP'd superhero game is just dead in the water. No point, won't sell. It's just not worth the effort. And I was really like taken back by that because I felt like
Well, that's because we grew up in the 80s with plenty of non IP sci-fi role playing superhero role playing games. That was a whole subgenre.
Absolutely. And so it's like there's some things where I thought, okay, well, this would be a relatively easy pitch around. Now it's like, oh no, it turns out that's one of the things I'm definitely going to have to do myself if I want to see it happen.
Mm.
Whereas these things, it's like, okay, these things are pitchable about. I've gotten someone to pick this up. I've gotten someone to pick that up. I reckon I can get someone to pick this thing up if I pitch it around. And I still want to make all of them, and I see no reason that the fact that nobody is interested in them should in any way stop me. And
So in a way, there's a sort of impatience is a good way of describing it, sort of bullishness as well, which is like, well, if you just by force of will want to see something in the world, then by golly, put it out there, and self-publishing is your route to say, well, I have a thing and I want it to exist, and if I can figure out how to make it exist, then on my head be it, and here it is, everyone.
absolutely, and I think like if you're doing something because you want it to happen, particularly for something like minis games, the level of success you need to just achieve it happening is tiny in actual. It's minis. If you're happy to just put it as a PDF, it's the level of success necessary is basically zero. You can go on Kickstarter with a $1 goal and you can achieve that, and then somebody will have your game and they will not be you or anyone you know, and that's a certain sort of success, and that's great and that's fine. And if you want to sell physical books and you're willing to go through print on demand, the level of success you like backers numbers you need for that is it also really really low. If you're just willing to work out how to make it happen rather than deciding some arbitrary level of like what it should be, what the success should be, how it should happen, then you really can do anything that you want to do. You just have to be realistic.
And to turn that back on your story, then, like, did you have a purely like numbers based target where you're like, well, I think that the minimum reasonable way that I can achieve this game in this format with this printing quality is, you know, this many units, and so that's how many I have to sell? Or was there a point where it's like, well, hey, if less than, you know, if less than 100 people have this game in their collection, then I'll be sad, but more than 100, actually, I'm going to feel pretty good about myself. Like, was there some kind of emotional break point for you?
No, I mean, it's hard to tell because the first thing was figuring out the monetary budget break point, and that was a number of people that seemed like that'd be pretty cool if that many people had the game. So
Okay,
I
so
don't think.
it kind of was that spreadsheet calculation first, and that brought you to a place where you were comfortable that, okay, if that's success, that feels like success to me. It looks like success from the spreadsheet's point of view. The game will be out there.
I mean, like emotionally, frankly, like launching Kickstarter, the first person who I had no idea who they were was like the moment of emotional like success
Right, right.
if
That
you want
was
to
the
say that.
fist pump when it was like, wow, okay, it's a thing.
Yeah. I mean, I was very lucky with my first Kickstarter, and we had a really really good first day, and just that first day of like seeing total strangers all over the world going, yeah, that's the thing that thing you made is a
That
thing
looks
I want,
real.
and I will give you money for it. You
Right.
know, that was like the emotional sort of thing, and then yeah, it was basically like okay, and the big piece of advice I give like people going to Kickstarter is figure it out in such a way that when you press launch on your Kickstarter until you finish fulfilling, you break even.
Mm.
And that was the base number of people that's where the goal was at. And so, after that, you can start thinking about profit and things of that nature. And there was enough people where I was like, if we get there, I think I'd be pretty proud of that and pretty happy with it. And we did, and we overfunded and whatnot. So I think they're the sort of the practical consideration of figuring out how it could be done was already ahead of the emotional consideration of what would be satisfying if it happened.
Yeah.
So I don't think that was a thing that ever like needed to get answered for me.
Mm.
Um, and then yeah, and then I've always been like pitching around, and I struggled with pitching. I struggle with the process of doing it. It's not a thing that comes naturally to me. And then Exalted Funeral have picked it up, and they've the Puke Apocalypse is going to be such a good looking thing. It's beautiful. It's great, and I will say like versus the thing of counting every piece of artwork that you put into the book and figuring out what the exact minimum number of like images you can get away with to sell the minimum viable product of the thing, because you are paying for it out of your own pocket and you want to achieve a certain goal, like this is now enough artwork that it looks good enough, it's up to an acceptable standard, whatever that is, versus going to a company who are like, yeah, let's get a few more pictures, let's get some more stuff in here, let's just make it look better.
Mm.
We'll figure out like, they've got the sort of the reach to say yes, this will be fine, we can budget for more, we can put more money into it, we can take more risk on it because they know like roughly what their sales going to be, has been very freeing, I think, versus there's a different sort of, because people talk about the freedom of being a self-publisher, there's a different sort of freedom, I think, is actually the truth of the matter. And it's been my experience is like, and both are great and both are lovely, and for me personally, being able to like have a go at each of them has been
Mm.
the best possible thing. It's just been absolutely delightful. And I don't think I'll ever only do one in the future, just because both are different and both I find very enjoyable and interesting, and like I say, freeing in different ways. And I'm lucky, I guess, at the moment I'm getting to do both of those things, and you're soon going to experience the wonderful joy of doing both of them at the same
Well,
time.
so I mean, I think that probably brings us to our conclusion of this 2 episode arc on should you choose publishing or self-publishing? And the answer is don't choose, do both.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
should you do first? Now, that is, I think, contained within the weeds of both of this conversation. It's to do with what your specific goals are, what you will consider success, both for your sort of the financial position you're in and the risk you're able to consume, but also what is emotionally going to feel like it was worth your time, and that you're going to walk away from that experience feeling like you did a thing and you're proud of that thing. Then there's a bunch of practical things that we've covered, but I think that's really the core of it. So, all right, well, thanks, Glenn.
Absolutely fantastic. And, again, you know, uh, we'd said, like, if people have gone through this journey or are thinking of this journey on the last conversation, to stop down into the comment section and tell us about it. If you didn't do that last time, do it this time if that's
An
true for
opportunity
you.
now.
And if, this conversation has made you reconsider, particularly, that would be lovely to hear in the comment section. If you do go down to the comment section, please hit like and subscribes. If you don't go down to the comment section, just go down to the like and subscribes bit and hit that anyway. Swing by the
YouTube needs to
Discord.
know. They need to know about the existence of your thumbs.
Yes, swing by the Discord, have a chat with us in there. If you're wondering, if you're not sure, if you want more advice, or like words from people who have done it, please come by the Discord. We'd love to like try to help, as best we can. Swing by the Patreon, Mike's Patreon, and give him money because he needs coffee desperately. But for
You
now,
caught me yawning during that conversation, don't you?
for now, and from this episode of Rule of Carnage, it'll be thank you and goodbye. So thank you and goodbye. Bye bye.
Ta-da!